Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's tempting to have a microphone. I feel almost like starting to sing, right? But my name is Mario Tovar, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So basically what I do, I listen to people. I talk to people. I do assessments. I give advice, things like that, right? But I'm a Christian. So what we decided to do was to combine all that and to put everything together to offer a series of talks like the ones we're going to do tonight. And in conjunction with what Pastor Andy is going to be preaching, we're of course, we hope that God is going to allow us to go through this path and that He will help us being less imperfect, right? Yeah. Now, before anything, I'm going to ask everyone, and I know some people are joining in, but before anything, I would like to pray. So every time we have this series, we're going to start with a prayer asking for God's guidance, okay? So if you bow your heads with me. Thank you, Lord, for this evening that you let us gather here in your temple. We thank you for all the blessings that you've given us today, and that we thank you for protecting us and taking care of us throughout all this time. We ask you that you continue to light us with your light, that you cover us with your power, and that you give us health and wisdom as we go through these times. We ask you that you bless all our loved ones wherever they are. You protect them, and we thank you for everything you give for us, that you give us and that you do for us every day. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you. So this series, so what we're going to be doing is talking about healthy families, right? Now, oftentimes as a psychologist, when I hear somebody coming, or when I go to a hospital and I do a consultation, oftentimes people say, I'm not crazy, I don't need this. I'm just fine. You're the loquero, right, or the shrank, right? But the truth is, this is not about that, right? The series that we have is not to determine who is okay and who is not. It's rather to try to contribute and to create awareness into what we're doing so that we can become less imperfect, right? What is the point of us coming to church every Sunday and practicing Jesus' teachings every time? The point of it is not to, I just want to feel better one moment and then that's okay. Is to continue to work in becoming less imperfect, right? And what we're hoping is through this series, we're going to be able to talk and cover some information that may be useful. Maybe some of the stuff you've heard before, maybe some of it you haven't. But the point of this is to create awareness and to help, right? This series are what we call psychoeducational, so don't worry about the name, but basically we'll be talking, I'll give you some information, and we'll do an activity at the end. If at one point anyone has some difficulties that are beyond what we're talking about and you need help, that's what we're here for, okay? So yes, I am a Christian, I'm a member of this church, but I'm also a psychologist, so anything that we can do to help, we're here for that, okay? So that was a short introduction. So we're gonna start with, as you know, watch out, here comes the psychologist, right? What some people think is that, psychologists read minds. Oh, we don't, right? We listened, we talk to people, and we study human behavior. We study how people behave, what they think, what they believe, right? So now what we're going to do is an icebreaker. The icebreaker is... we had to change it with the virus going on and all the restrictions. We were going to do something that was more personal, but because of that, we're going to change it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is ask you if you came with a family member, with someone that you know, if you can just pair up with them. If not, if you can talk to someone. Now, you don't have to be. One of the rules with the coronavirus, the new one, is that you cannot be too close. So the point is not for you to be very, very close to anyone, right? But what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you can stare or look at someone. Now the exercise is this. I want you to stare at that person without saying anything. Just look at that person and that's it. Okay? Now what I want you to just do that, and then we'll talk a little bit about that, right? So just for a few seconds, let's see how long can you stay like that, staring at each other. Ready? So go ahead. Okay, now as you do that, I want you to think of something. I want you to think of how you're feeling, okay? What is this about, right? If you're staring at someone that you know already, you probably have different feelings than if you're staring with to a stranger, right? Yes, and I imagine that. Yeah, you're done. You're done. Please stop. You're done. So that was the icebreaker. Now the question that I have for you is, how easy or how hard was it for you to do that? It's hard, right? Now, if you're staring at your son or your daughter or your family member, it's probably a little bit easier, but it may still be a little bit awkward, right? It's like, okay, wait a minute. If you're more distant than you're closer, that makes a difference, right? If you're distant, like, yeah, I can see anyone. From here, I can see anyone, and I don't feel uncomfortable, right? Number one, I have a mic, so that makes me feel powerful. But two, we have a long distance, right? So it's not as awkward. But why did I ask you to do that, other than making you feel uncomfortable a little bit? The point of that exercise is to realize that our communication is more than words, but unfortunately, we rely a lot on words. And when we do this nonverbal stuff, it makes us feel uncomfortable because we're not used to using that, right? When you stare at someone and they have a certain feeling or they have something in their minds, they may show a different response than what you may expect. And that response may trigger something within you, like, oh, she must be really upset. She must be really mad, you know? I'm sure that her husband did something wrong or, something. And then we start playing these scenarios in our mind, right? But in reality, there's something that is naturally uncomfortable about just staring at people, right? Part of it is because we don't use that skill. Now, we're going to talk about communication. So the question that I have is, we use that term a lot, communication. We have to have better communication. But what does that mean? Oftentimes when we talk about communication, we think of talking, right? Speaking. Communication is the words that you use, right? But it's more complicated than that. As we did right now, communication can be also nonverbal. For example, you're asking me, are we done? Can we stop? Right? That's part of communication. Or smiling, Some of you were smiling maybe more comfortable. Some of you were like smiling but kind of like uncomfortable. All that is communication. You didn't say a single word, but you communicated a lot of things, right? So we're going to talk about communication. The basic building block of our relationship, as we were talking about as we heard in last service from Pastor Nate, communication is extremely important. It's a foundation, right? For us to be able to have a strong foundation, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, even emotionally, we need to have good communication, right? We're social beings by nature, so we just don't talk to no one and it's okay. Usually we are inclined to talk to people, right? Now, in terms of, let's see, where is it? Okay. The purpose of communication, to convey our thoughts, feelings, and connection to one another. And it's a two-way process. You need to have two entities, for sure. Whoever is communicating, whoever is receiving the message, right? Football, we talk about the Dallas Cowboys that hopefully, knock on wood, they'll have a better season this year. The quarterback sends a pass. It doesn't matter how accurate he is. If the receiver is not going to be a good receiver, he's going to drop the ball. It's not going to work. Communication is like that. If I talk to someone and I have the magical formula of to live 100 years, but I just happen to speak Russian and I live in the valley, well, it's unlikely anyone here speaks Russian, right? Does anyone speak Russian? No? Okay, that's what I thought. So, because we need to have that communication. We need to be able to communicate and share that message, right? Now, there's some gender differences. Well, before that, let me ask you, let me go to the next one. What happens if the message is not transmitted? Let's say that I'm the best communicator and I have a magical formula, but the other person is not receiving this well. What's going to happen? But the other question is, who is to blame? Well, it's because Chonita, I usually use the term Chonita. Anyone named Chonita? No? Do you know anyone by name Chonita? No? Okay. So I usually use that, right? So Chonita usually, it doesn't matter if I'm the best communicator, if the other person doesn't receive that message, it's not going to work, right? And immediately, if I am the communicator, I'm going to be, it's Chonita's fault. She didn't hear me, right? So communication is more than words, right? So I'm going to show you a few faces. So without, just stare at that and tell me, what emotion do you think this person is evoking? What do you think this person is feeling? He's angry, right? He seems very angry, right? What's that? Well, that's a good question. What is he always looks like that, right? Why are you angry? I'm not angry. This is my face, right? That's a very good point. But yet, there's something about us that for a lot of us may make us think that he's angry. Right now, what about the next one? This one is a bit more challenging. What about that one? Is more neutral, stressed out, thinking, yes. Is she thinking something positive or something negative based on what? Is she, now, look at that face. Now I want you to imagine that she's thinking, how do I get rid of my husband? Okay. Now imagine that she's thinking, the same face, now I want you to imagine that she's thinking, how do I get back to college? Do you think that both possibilities can be there with that thinking phase? Yes, right? But we fill in the blank a lot of times, right? We have, just because a person has a certain phase doesn't mean that it's communicating what they're intending to. It may be what we're perceiving, right? So now, there's some differences in communication. So if somebody's introverted or somebody's extroverted, in other words, somebody's shy, and somebody's just very outspoken, the communication is going to be different. Some people are going to like to talk a lot, and some people are not going to like to talk much, right? None of them is wrong. It doesn't mean that one of them is better than the other one, but those differences may play a role in the way that the message is perceived. The other thing is that whenever we communicate, we imagine that the message is what the person has in mind at that moment, but we have to keep in mind that we're beings that are the result of a lot of experiences, right? We grew, we developed, we had a lot of experiences. For example, without you thinking about it right now, I ask you, what were you thinking on 9/11? September 11, 2001. Now, a lot of you are younger than me, so, but some of you may say, well, I was at school. They got us out or something like that, right? Before I ask you that question, you were not thinking about it. It's somewhere there. Somebody asks you that question, it brings up, right? It comes up. Communication is like that. Sometimes we receive a message and we don't know what the person's experience or background or context is saying, right? Now, gender differences in communication is very important, and this happens. To the point of the brain is very different. Women tend to, actually the part of the brain, and I promise I won't bore you more than this. This is the only lecture-like, school-like thing. The part of the brain that controls language is in the left hemisphere, in this part, right? And usually women have a more elaborate left hemisphere in some way, so they're better at language areas. They are more expressive. They're able to, in general, you know, it's like, well, what about I am a poet? And it's a guy like, yeah, you know. But, or a woman that says, I'm a mechanic. That's okay, that may be the case. I'm not saying that that's true, right? But in general terms, the brain is like that. So women tend to have more language, or be better at language abilities than men. So this is an example. The woman is there saying, it says here that women use over 70% more words than men. And the man responds, really? That's all, right? It's just an example. And yeah, you know, it's now, there may be some exceptions, it's true, but in general terms, that's how it is, right? Another example that I have on language, and you won't be able to read this, but on the left side we have a woman, and we have all those shades of colors, right? So a woman has all these terms, and a man, we just see purple. So a woman has plum, eggplant, grape, orchid, lavender, and we see purple. That's all. Don't ask me more. It's just for, what color was it? Purple. No, it was eggplant. I have never heard of that one. It's like, yeah, oh, I'm sorry, you know. Those differences are well ingrained in our brain. It's not something that you choose, right? So I'm going to tell you some general information now. So this applies to communication and relationships, right? So they did a survey. They interviewed 100 mental health professionals, and they asked them, what do you think is the main cause for divorce? Now, communication problems, most people, over 60% of the practitioners said communication problems. So according to the majority of the counselors that they interviewed, they said that communication problems are really the result of, or what causes divorce. But also, the second most common factor was the inability to resolve conflict. And that's a very general term. Basically, if people have communication problems, they're probably going to have problems resolving the conflict, right? So why do we choose communication first? Because of this. Because communication is huge in making us stronger, but also and I tell you from experience as a clinician, when I've worked with couples, I would say about 95% of the cases that I've treated, as a couple, is communication. It's like, well, I want you to do this magical thing, hypnosis or something. No, let's talk. How are you communicating? How are you talking? We're not. Let's start with that, right? More about the survey. So men cite nagging and complaining as a top communication problem in their marriage. So they said, yeah, my wife nags too much, right? And my wife is laughing. I promise I never complain about that. I promise I never did. By the way, she didn't know how this was going to look like, so in her defense. Now, women's top complaint was that their spouse does not validate their opinions or feelings, okay? So in other words, women are crying, and maybe men are like, oh, what's wrong with you? Eating popcorn, right? Or the woman comes and crying and says, I need to talk to you after the game, Or, yeah, okay, but before that, can you get me another Coke, right? So, anyway, by the way, the other difference in the brain, women are more inclined to emotions. I'm not saying that women are more emotional, they're more intuitive with emotions. So for us, for guys, it takes us a lot longer to understand emotions than women. Women right away pick up, right? And men in general terms like, like, shh, what happened, When we're going, women are already coming back, basically. So now some communication obstacles. These are some of the common, and we're going to see several obstacles. If it applies to you, by the way, something that I want to share with you, I'm not going to ask anyone to, well, tell me about your life or how's your relationship. No, this is for you, But my suggestion is, as we go over this, reflect on where you are and see where do we need to work on, including myself, to improve, right? I was sharing with Pastor Nate that as I was working on this, I was working on a slide and I realized, oh, wait a minute, I just did that. I'm sorry. And I had to apologize to my wife, right? It's about it's not that we're evil people. It's just that sometimes things happen and we need to be mindful of those things, right? We focus on what we want to say while others are talking instead of listening to them. Does that sound familiar? You're in a discussion or you're saying, well, no, it was blue. I remember. The car that we saw was blue. No, it was red. And boom, suddenly there's a discussion, right? And as the person is telling me why it is red, I don't hear that. I say, no, but it's blue. And as she's talking to me, I'm thinking, how am I going to say that it's blue in different ways so she can understand, so I can win the argument, right? That kind of thing. We bring up problems unrelated to the present conversations. You're talking about something, well, I forgot to turn off the light. Oh, yes, but remember that time that you forgot to feed the cat also? That was 5 years ago. Yes, but you did. Remember, So that's another problem with communication. We assume what is right for others and try to convince them of this. This is a classic fail. You know what your problem is. You know that there's already something wrong coming after that, right? You're already, oh yeah, I'm gonna wear my gloves first. Okay, so I'll wait, and then you know what, and whatever you say after that, yeah, it's not gonna be nice, right? So now, John Gottman, he's a researcher and he's a clinician. He works with couples. He's one of the eminence in couples therapy, basically. And he came up with this. I like this because we're a church, right? And this is a faith-based presentation. So I like his title. This is his title, not mine, I promise. And it's the four horsemen of communication. So all his research is about relationships, couples, and how they succeed or they don't succeed, right? And he pointed out two things. One of them, that most of the problems in relationships have to do with communication. Two, there's four major problems or, horsemen in that sense. So the first one is criticism. It's not critical thinking or it's not about constructive criticism, okay? This refers to an attack on your partner at the core of their character, okay? It's not a complaint. So, for example, a complaint is, I was scared when you were running late and didn't call me. I thought we had agreed that we would do that for each other. A criticism, and this is a difference, right? You never think about how your behavior is affecting other people. I don't believe you are forgetting your... Sorry, I'll look here, I forgot my glasses. You never think about how your behavior is affecting other people. I don't believe you are that forgetful. You're just selfish. You never think of others. You never think of me. Do you see the difference? So one thing is, you can bring up a complaint. If we're not perfect, we make mistakes. But the question is, what do we do with that mistake? One of them is like, well, what happened here? Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Or the other one is, oh yeah, I'm gonna wear my glove, and I'm gonna throw a jab, right? So the first horseman is criticism. The next one that Dr. Gottman researched was contempt, and this is a very important one, okay? So this is when a person is truly mean, okay? Truly mean, not like, well, well, you're mean too, or well, you're raising your voice. No, they insult, right? We treat others with disrespect, mock them with sarcasm, ridicule, call them names, and mimic or use body language such as eye rolling or scoffing, right? Like, but you didn't, here you go again. Or that kind of thing. Now, this is a very important one because of this. So contempt has been associated with my magical finger is not working. There you go. Contempt is the single greatest predictor of divorce. So from all those horsemen, right, the one that leads to divorce is the one that we just talked about. Okay, it's not about the other one, which, I mean, I'm not saying all of them are, neither of them are nice, right? But the one that is more likely to result in divorce is this one, okay? Why is that important to know? Well, there's some work to do, right? If this is something that is happening to me. The next one, the third horseman, is defensiveness. Now, typically a response to criticism. When somebody's criticizing, then you respond like that in a defensive way. Now, everyone has, if they feel attacked, they have a right to express something about it. Well, you're telling me that I didn't do something that I actually did, or vice versa, right? This is beyond that. This is almost like a mechanism to try to say, look, no, this is your problem. When feeling unjustly accused, we search for excuses to become innocent victims so our partners back off. Now, the problem with that is that it doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't fix any of the problems, right? The last one, which is usually the opposite of contempt, or it happens with contempt, is called stonewalling. Like you put kind of like what we're talking about, building the house on the rocks. Well, too many rocks, and if we put it on a wall, that's a problem too, right? So we have to be careful with that. So it's about how we use the rocks, right? Usually a response to contempt. So the listener withdraws from the interaction, shuts down, and simply stops responding to their partner. Like, but let's talk about it. And they just don't say anything. So it doesn't really help in any way. It's not resolving, and probably is the result of the person feeling very hurt, right? Now, turning out, turning away, acting busy, or engaging in obsessive or distracting behavior are examples of this. This is coping without addressing the issue. So the problem is that just by not talking about it doesn't mean that the problem is going to go away, right? It continues to be here, right? Now I'm going to show you some, I think that this is maybe too small, but just some research. This is from Dr. Gottman's research. So the four horsemen, which is the one that we just talked about, predict early divorcing within 5.6 years after the wedding. So basically, if you as a clinician, right, you assess someone and you find out that there's something off within those four, this guy can actually predict people that are not going to make it within 5 years. Okay. The average couple waits 6 years before seeking help for marital problems. So people, instead of asking for help, usually they last up to 6 years before they can say, maybe we should do something about it, right? And that's one of the problems actually with the other stuff, because it builds up. It makes worse and worse and worse, becomes worse and worse. Emotional withdrawal, the absence of positive affect during conflict discussions, predict later divorcing. So whenever a person is emotionally withdrawn, they're not, forget about intimacy, right? Physical intimacy, or like, oh, you touched the cheek, or, it's about the emotional part, about feeling protected, feeling cared for. That actually is a predictor of the divorce within 16 years, right? Half of all marriages that end do so within the first 7 years. So if a marriage lasts after 7 years, they have a greater chance of making it. The point is, how are they going, right? How are they doing? Some marriages last for 40 years, and I've had some clients that say, I've been married for 20 years, but I'm really unhappy. I've been unhappy since the second year, you know? Why are you with them then? You know, not that I'm encouraging them to leave, but I'm curious about it. And usually say, well, it's because of the children. They support me. I don't want to do this, right? What have you done about it? Well, nothing. I just learned to live with it, right? It's almost like a constant punishment. 85% of stonewallers, remember the people that just isolate, they don't talk, in heterosexual relationships are men. So most men are the ones that are going to be shutting down, and women are going to be like, no, listen to me. We need to talk. It doesn't mean it's, you know, everyone is like that, right? There's some women that may be the opposite, or men that may be the opposite. Now, stable marriages have a 5-to-1 ratio of positivity to negativity during conflict. Whenever there's an argument, what his research showed that whenever productive couples, there's 5 positive things to only 1 negative. That's how they make it, right? That's why they're positive. However, conflicting relationships that have a lot of problems, they actually have 0.8 positive to 1 negative. So they have more negatives than positive, right? 80% of the time, women bring up issues in heterosexual relationships. So 80% of the time, guys may not be as open, and women be like, you know what, you hurt me with that, you know? You didn't do this, you know, I was expecting this other thing, right? And 67% of new patients or parents experience a precipitous drop in couple satisfaction in the first 3 years of the baby's life. So what happens is, and it's no secret, when a baby's born, life changes. And it's a blessing, but at the same time we need to adjust, right? So it's like, okay, we need to, suddenly it's not about 2 people, it's about 3, right? Or 4 if there's 3, or 5 if there's, you know, you get it, right? So with all this, my suggestion, the first thing is, there you go. Where are we in our relationship? Sorry, we didn't prepare anything, so she's doing awesome, and I'm sorry. The question is, where are we in our relationship, right? So all this information, all this research, I don't say it to tell you, well, if all those are high, then sorry, good luck, you know? No. There's hope, there's help. This doesn't mean that it cannot be resolved. But the first step in resolving is you need to be aware of where you are before you take the next step to try to get better and better, right? So now, perception and motivation. One of the things about communication has to do with the perception. If I talk to my wife and I say, I'm sorry, do you know where this is actually a true story. Do you know where I left my blank? Fill in the blank. I don't know where I leave my stuff, and she knows. I don't know how, she just magically knows, right? She knows everything. I left it in the closet. Well, I just checked and it's not there. Let's say my pair of shoes, my new pair of shoes, right? I just checked and it's not there. You want me to go and check? Well, yes, because, and I'm finally, I'm gonna get her this time and say, see, I told you. Somehow, I think that she hides it, puts it there and says, see, and then she gets it because I cannot find it. And she finds it. And if she comes and says, there they are, oh, thank you. But what if I am bothered by the fact that she brought them with her and put them there, and I grunt and say, or say, well, you see, next time, maybe you should be more organized, even though it's my clothes, right? That's not gonna go well, right? But what if I am tired and I just say, thank you? She may believe like, okay, now he's been ungrateful. I came all the way here and he's giving me with that tone. Maybe I'm just tired, right? But maybe it's also her perception because maybe she's tired too, right? Perception plays a big role in communication. Now, I'm gonna show you a picture. I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember this? Please tell me because you know I feel really, really old. And Facebook, yes. Yes, the color. Well, let me ask you, and I don't know, what color do you see there? Green, white? Green and white. Green and white, yes. So when he came, now this is green and white. It's a low. Okay, so let's go back to oh, that's good, you're in action, that's good. You cut up. I think the important thing is this, and I don't know, when this came out, this is a low resolution image. When it came out, people swore that this was white with gold, and some people said, no, it's blue. Was it blue? Black or blue? Yeah, so, and people are like, no, I can see it this way. No, I can see it this other way. This is what perception is. Perception is what we make of information that comes into our brain, right? We perceive through our senses. You listen to things, you feel things, you see things. But whatever you bring into your mind, you need to make sense of it. What does that mean, right? And with communication, it's a big problem. For example, sometimes we don't know that we're talking about the same thing, but yet it's about the perspective that you see it, right? And some people may argue about things like this. No, it is a 9. No, it is a 6. I can see it. It's a 6. No, it's a 9. Something as mild as this discussion can escalate to big problems, right? The other thing about perception is sometimes we assume that we know what the other person is thinking. And sometimes we think, wait a minute, what do you think this person meant? Or I see you too quiet, right? So I'll tell you, for the ladies that are here in the group, I'll tell you, the guy's brain, our mind is not that deep. I'm sure he's thinking, no, we're thinking of light bulbs here, Maybe the one in Spanish, right? I forgot what, I won't try to make it, but the truth is, sometimes it's our perception of, well, wait a minute, what is this person thinking that makes us think all these other stories? I'm sure he's thinking of this girl, I'm doing all this thing. No, we're just thinking of cars, the cowboy's losing, we're thinking of burgers or what are we going to eat next time, video games, cartoons, movies. That's how we are, right? And again, this has to do also with emotions. This is not our fault either. It's our brains, right? Our brains are wired differently. Now, the question, the next section is going to be about listening. The question is, are we really listening to the person, our significant other? Do we show that we're listening? That's the other thing. Okay. Sometimes we think that we're listening and we're not really listening. How many times do we put ourselves in automatic? I would never do that. Actually, psychologically, we do because that's how we survive. We have to, right? The problem is that sometimes we do it too much. This is an example. Now, imagine, this is the only meme I could find. Imagine that beer is Coke, right? So because we don't drink. So the woman says, you never listen to me. You only hear what you want to hear. And the guy says, sure, I'll have a Coke. He didn't hear anything of what she was trying to communicate a concern. And he's like, nope, I'm just hearing what I'm hearing, right? Especially now with Facebook and things like that. Facebook is a great tool. We've been talking about the messages in the future weeks, and it's going to be wonderful. We'll be able to hear the message, and with this virus and all these things, we'll be okay, right? So it's great. Technology is great. The problem is that when we use it like 9 hours a day, that's a problem. And, I'm guilty sometimes. Like, let's say those cowboys, right? So now, everything that I'm telling you up to this point is about research, right? We're talking about studies that they've done, psychologists, but guess what? The Bible said it better. Everything, and it's so interesting to see that everything that we talk about here and the research and all these things, it's surprisingly that you can find a verse, you can find a Bible verse, right? And this one, and thank you, Anna, she gave me the verse. So, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Okay, the way that they say it in my ranch or in my town, they say there's a reason why we have two ears and one mouth, to use it in that proportion. We should listen to more than talk, right? So now the other thing is, even if we're listening, if we're not showing that we're listening, it's almost as detrimental. Let's say somebody's talking to me, and I was actually, as I was working here, I'll share the example from earlier. I'm working on this presentation. I'm working and putting pictures and all these things, right? My jokes, because I don't want anyone falling asleep. So I'm working on that. And then she goes, okay, I'm going to go to the office and set up the computer for the girls. I said, okay. So she comes and says, what did I say? And then you have the thought like, okay, run, now is the time. Or you can try and answer. Now, lucky for me, I wasn't on automatic. I was listening. I was just very concerned about this. I wanted to make sure that I did a good job. So I said, and I repeated what she said. She's like, oh, okay, I'm testing you. Now, the problem is this. And we were talking about it. And I said, why do you ask me? She said, because there's been other times, and it's true, that I tell you, did you do this? I said, no, I didn't know. She's like, I told you. And always what I ask is, what did I say after you told me? She's like, nothing. Then I didn't hear you. Like, if I didn't say anything, it's not my fault, right? Defensiveness, remember? I'm guilty. So anyway, with active listening, we need to show, it's not only about listening, but showing. Imagine that I'm listening to everything you say, but I'm checking my phone. Tell me more. Yes, yes. No, leave that, no. Yes, and then what happened? You know, even if you're listening, it doesn't show. And that person that is talking to you doesn't feel heard. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not as important, but I'm listening to you. Yes, but you don't give me your undivided attention. Or even if you can repeat everything, there's something missing, right? How do we do that? It's not about acting. It's about just putting, number one, and this is what I do sometimes. I have a witness here, so I cannot lie. She, besides God, you know, He knows when I don't say the truth, but the truth is, if I'm multitasking and things like that, it's not an excuse for not listening, right? It's okay to put everything. What I do is I put my phone away, okay, tell me. And then I contact, and then I have a conversation, because if not, I may miss some things, right? But sometimes we don't do it, and I'm guilty of it. Sometimes we're too busy. Sometimes you're driving, and not driving and texting, because nobody here does that, right? But so ultimately, why do we do what do we do? Now, whenever somebody argues, there's a couple arguing. How many times do you think the person is thinking, how can I affect them? How can I make them suffer? We don't. I mean, there's some people that are evil for sure, you know. But when you're with someone, a significant other, family member, and you know them well, you know that they don't want to hurt you, but yet they say things that hurt you. It's about the intention. Well, what do you intend to do when you said that? And you'll be surprised how many times will you think, wait a minute, I was angry. Yeah, I wanted to hurt you. It's not nice. We're human, right? But sometimes after it passes, you're like, I would never hurt you. I love you. But at that moment, we don't think, right? The other thing is, sometimes, how many times do we talk to people? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but we're talking about something, and then you just get caught in this conversation where you just want to prove yourself that you're right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. At the end, I don't know if this happened to you, you forgot what you were talking about, what you were arguing about initially. It just goes to once, you know, okay, but what did you say? Well, I don't remember. You see, I was right. No, just because I don't remember, it doesn't mean you were right. And it gets, you know, a single thing, like a seed, gets into something bigger, right? Like a mustard seed. Well, it works both ways, right? Proverbs 10:19. With lots of words comes wrongdoing, but the wise restrain their lips. Now, let me ask you, how easy is it for you to be very highly emotional, angry, even excited, sad, and not say a word? How many times when you're in a discussion with somebody else, or you're trying to make a point, I know what I'm going to say, because this is going to show that I'm right. How many times can you control yourself and say, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to let them talk. But your mind is saying, but what you're saying is true, you know, and what she's saying is wrong. Yeah, listen, because maybe that's not completely true, right? Our mind tells you, no, you're right. You should fight for this, because what is the point? Why? You're going back to the previous slide, why do we do the things that we do, you know? Now, I'm going to show you some differences in the reactions in people. So on the left side, you have the bride, and on the right side, you have the groom, and they're reading their vows, right? So on the left side, you have the woman reading the vows from the man. And every section, she's becoming more and more emotional. She's like, oh my God, oh yes, oh, that's so sweet. Now, the guy has the same face. He finished it like, yeah, very pretty. I'm not saying that guys don't get emotional, but usually that's a summary of how our brain works, right? And the other thing that I wanted to add, and keep this in mind, even if you're angry, even if somebody's angry, even if there's guess what? There's going to be differences in couples. It happens because we're human. We're two entities, two universes, right? But even if that's the case, guess what? We still love each other, right? You still have a connection. You still have caring. What's the point of arguing? Oh yeah, I'm going to prove you wrong, even if it costs us our marriage and we're going to get divorced. Why? Now, the point is it that important for you to be right? Because maybe you're not right to begin with, right? Even if you believe it, is it that important? Is that the most important thing that you need to get from there? We're going to have, some of the series is going to be about managing emotions. So there's a lot of information that I try to restrain myself from including, so I didn't put a lot of that. is just going to be a little bit about emotions, but there's going to be another talk about emotions that is going to be great. So in this case, the only thing I want to share is this: how do we talk with emotions? Emotions affect our communication, no question about it. When you're very happy, you're likely to talk more fluidly, maybe clearly. When you're angry, you're likely to raise your voice, use words that are not very pleasant, right? Now, this is something that I got from another presentation that I gave about crisis. Now, one of the things that they teach you whenever there's a crisis, whether it's at a hospital, whether it's on the street, on the road, the first thing is you need to remain calm. Nothing else. You need to stay calm. Why? Because emotions get on the way and then you make mistakes. That's how it is. How do we communicate in a crisis? The same way that we should communicate whenever there's an argument and whenever there's high emotions. Why? Because if you do that, there's going to be fewer mistakes for sure. You need to communicate simply. Don't elaborate. Well, but in 1995, when we did this, I remember I was 7 and there was a cat, and just go to the point, right? Timely. Don't talk about things that are not about now. Focus on what you're resolving at that moment. Accurately. Make sure that you include facts, okay? Well, I feel like this. Yeah, those are your emotions, right? But make sure that you include information that is factual. Repeatedly, sometimes you need to repeat yourself more than once for the message to be conveyed. Credibly, you need to make sure that, don't lie, right? Other than the Bible saying don't lie, what else do you need to convince yourself that you shouldn't lie, right? Consistently, you need to be consistent. You cannot change the story. You cannot change things like that, right? Now, there's rebooting your family communication style. This is just ways of improving. If you're not doing this, if you're doing it, great. This includes children. Now, I was going to include a lot of information about children, but I ran out of pages or slides. We're going to have another topic probably on parenting as well, and families, right? So, modeling positive behavior. You shared about this last Sunday. Pastor Nate talked about, it's not about saying things. You need to act. You need to do it. It's not about, don't do that and then you end up doing it, right? That's not, you need to model the behavior. You need to work on yourself before you can include that in your family. Language, make sure that you use language that is clear, but also that is not threatening or insulting. Listening, the most important thing, okay? We have 2 ears, 1 mouth, use it in that proportion. Listen more than talk. Family meetings. Now, without asking you to raise hands, one of the things, and we were talking about this as well, family meetings is important. It's not about getting together and everyone on their phones, okay? Sometimes it happens, it's guilty. It's about getting together and saying, how was your day? And give them your undivided attention, to your children, to your spouse, right? Positive reinforcement, this is just a fancy term that we have. Basically, you do things that are likely to have more positive behavior, right? You do something, if somebody does their homework, great, we're gonna play a board game. Well, the person is more likely to continue to get good grades if they know that there's gonna be something good coming up, right? Healthy family activities, including creative, spiritual, and altruistic. Guess what? One of the activities can be just coming to church. That's great. Now, it's not about coming to church and, okay, Pastor Nate will take care of them. You talk, and Pastor Mike, and after that we get out and we don't talk about it for the whole week. Not even, how was the service? What did you learn? Like, I can't wait for those ribs. It's about reinforcing that. So whatever you get, you need to continue, right? Now, all this, number one, I didn't put this here. We got to the last part. We're going to do an activity right now. But all this is, we talk about the leading cause of divorce, right? We talk about some problems in relationships. Sometimes relationships don't last 7 years. Sometimes within 16 years, they're done, right? But guess what? All those things are not definite, okay? They're going to get better. They can get better. The problem is nobody can make them better but yourself. You need to start by saying, we have a problem. Houston, Elsa, we have a problem, right? Not Houston, because, and the important thing is now, the question is, well, what do we do? How do we resolve it? We're going to talk about some of these things. So, good communication, right? How do we have good communication? Number one, it takes effort. It takes effort and practice. And guess what? As you practice it, sometimes you're going to be upset. Sometimes you're like, well, there's going to be ups and downs, but every time that you work on it, it's going to get better and better. There's no magical pill for this. It takes effort, and it's gradually, it's going to be gradually improving. Includes a lot of different skills. So just because, well, I went to church, it didn't work. Well, I prayed, it didn't work. Like, no, you have to do more than that. You need to work on it. It's like, a garden. You need to take care of it, right? It requires to look in the mirror, not only in the window, right? So it's not only about looking outside and saying, you see, this is who you are, this is what you do to me. Remember those mirrors? I'm sure that I still have mine. Mirrors that we got from church, look at it and see. I mean, don't be like, well, I don't get it. Like, the point is, reflect on what you're doing and what you're not doing that you could do differently, right? So some of the skills and some of the stuff we talked about, active listening. When you talk to someone, listen more than talk. And as you're listening, make sure that you give them your undivided attention, that you talk, that you share information, but also something as simple as when they say something, you reframe it and you say, oh, you know what, that's interesting, I didn't know that. Suddenly, instead of saying, yep, like, maybe you should say more than that, right? Now, mindfulness is about, without getting into a lot of details, just basically being aware. For you, now, if I was to ask a lot of couples, what are the things that your spouse does wrong? A lot of them may say, oh, she does this and that, or he does this and this and that. Now, if I ask, what are the things that you do wrong? Maybe we won't get as long of a list, right? So the question is, what are we doing that we need to do? One of the premises in therapy that we always have in counseling is, what is it within your control that you can do to improve your situation? Well, it's because she didn't do this. I understand she didn't do that. Is there anything that you can do? It's going to help you anyway. What can you do? What is within your control so that you can improve this situation, right? Verbal versus nonverbal communication. One of the exercises we have actually, when I used to teach at the university, and when I had my students studying for counseling, I said, because I'm observing them doing therapy, and then when you have somebody role-playing and say, yeah, and they say this very tragic story, and then you see the faces of the students going, like, well, if I get counseling, I don't want my counselor to be like that. Like, yeah, this is what I did. Oh my God. Like, no, I must be really wrong. I don't want that, right? So one of the exercises that I told him is, okay, I want you to imagine that somebody's telling you that story, but I want you to look at yourself in the mirror. Or in a selfie, now that we have cell phones, right? And no paren la trompa, the one, But look at yourself in the mirror and make that face and see if the face that you're thinking is the one that you're showing. Because oftentimes it's not intentional. We're not aware of our facial expressions. Sometimes we have a face thinking, I've had this, we're going to take a picture, smile. Smile, I'm smiling. This is my smiling, right? Or sometimes I have the opposite. Okay, I want to take you a picture. I just got a criminal background check because I'm going to start working somewhere. And can you smile less? Okay. It's kind of hard. I didn't know I smiled that much. My wife says, why are you so happy all the time? I don't know. I'm actually very angry. I just can't help it. So be mindful, be aware of that, right? So some do's, and this is now what we're gonna do is we're gonna post a lot of stuff. I guess, can you post like documents and things? Okay, so we're gonna put all these together. Probably my jokes won't be there. So, but you'll take them with you, right? Because whoever wasn't here, like, what is this guy saying? What's wrong with this guy? He's a psychologist, So, but we're going to include information like this, so that you can have it as reference, right? So some of the do's that you can do, or things that you can do. 2-sentence rule. Basically, sometimes we use the term argue, but when you talk about something, the 2-sentence rule is that you're going to say something, and you're going to use only 2 sentences, and then you're going to be quiet. And you're going to wait for the other person to say, no, but you're wrong, no, but, you never get anywhere. Let the other person talk, right? So 2-sentence rule, you make a statement that is a lot briefer, it's easier to communicate, and it's easier to understand. Ask only one question at a time. But what about this? And then as you're answering, but also I remember, like, no, one at a time, right? Remember, what is the point of this? Improving communication, right? It's not about who is going to be, ¿quién es el más macho, like they say in boxing, right? No, it's not about who is going to win the argument, right? Stick to the current issue, one issue at a time. Now, there may be a lot of issues. We're human. That's okay. Stick with one at a time. You cannot resolve, when you go to Subway and you have a footlong, right? They even cut it in half, right? Hopefully, yeah, because it's going to be hard to eat. And also, you have to eat it little by little, right? Having too many problems is too much. You need to resolve one at a time. Stay calm. If this is not here, but here's one piece of advice that I do in therapy. If you start feeling that your emotions are really high, number one, rank it from 1 to 10. And if it passes 5, stop, take a deep breath, walk away, give yourself a 5-minute break, and then come back and do it, okay? When emotions are high, it's not gonna work, okay? Your emotions are gonna be talking, and you won't be able to resolve it. Minimize distractions, no cell phone, no TV, talk. Pay attention to nonverbal behavior. If I say something and I see that my spouse is making a face like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go there, right? Or sometimes if she's crying, it's like, oh, I just hurt her. I shouldn't do that, right? So we need to be able to pick up that. Show empathy. Always demonstrate empathy. Always show that you're there for them. It's not about whatever argument is going on right at that moment, whatever issue. Guess what? Show that you care. This is something bigger than that. Is you're in a relationship, right? And this person is important to you. And acknowledge what you have heard him or her express. When you talk, it's not enough for me to say, oh, by the way, Well, she should have heard it because I'm very clear. I'm a doctor, so she should know. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes she says things like that, and I don't understand. We're wired differently, remember. So sometimes we need to be more explicit for the person to understand, and for us to communicate better as well, right? Now, some don'ts. So these are some of the things that you should not do, okay? Avoid giving advice unless asked. You know what your problem is? Remember, doesn't end well. What would be helpful to you is, or I think that you would benefit from, no, unless they're asking you. Avoid interrupting. Don't interrupt. Don't talk down to each other. You're talking like a child, never works. Avoid name calling. Don't generalize this, and this is a problem that we have. This is a human problem. It always happens. We tend to generalize, and our mind takes over. It's what we call cognitive distortions, right? So when we say, nobody loves me, well, no, people love you, Not really, nobody. Well, what about so-and-so? Well, yeah, that person. What about so-and-so? Yeah, well, that too, yeah. So it's not nobody, right? Or this always happens to me. No, it just happened one time. No, it always, when was the other time? Well, just one time. So it's not always, right? Don't yell or shout. Don't raise your voice, okay? There's a lot of research that they've done. Emotions lead to certain behaviors. When emotions are high, you're gonna talk faster, you're gonna talk louder. But even if your emotions are not high, if you talk louder, your emotions are gonna go high to begin with. So it's a two-way street, right? If you control your speech and your tone of voice and your volume, automatically you're gonna be helping your emotions. God said it better. A soft and gentle and thoughtful answer turns away wrath, but harsh and painful and careless word stir up anger. Okay? Proverbs 15:1. Thank you for that. So, and by the way, the reason why I post those things is, guess what? Everything that I'm telling you and all these things, well, I don't have my Bible here with me, but they're in the Bible. A lot of the stuff, you read the Bible. It can be an activity that you do with family, but guess what? If you read the Bible and you analyze it, God is going to talk to you. He does. He just works like that, right? So we're going to do a few exercises. I promise I'm not going to ask you to raise your, and it's not going to be as uncomfortable as the previous one. So you don't have to stare without saying anything. So the first one is practicing iMessages. Whenever you're talking to someone, it's easier for a person to say, you always do this. Well, it's because we turn the problem to the other person or generalize it. And the truth is, we should focus on us. Okay? If you're arguing with someone, if you're discussing something with someone, you don't know how that person is feeling. You know how you're feeling. So focus on you. Okay? So some of the exercise, well, I'll tell you what. You can take it home. You don't have to do it here. We're going to post this as well in some worksheets as well so you can practice. So practice an iMessage. So for example, when you give me a big hug, I feel happy, loved, and close to you. So my suggestion is when you go home, when you do it at your own time, talk to your spouse. You can even use it with your children and say, okay, when you say something nice to me, I feel blank. How do you feel? At the same time, you can say, when you are rude to me in front of your friends, I feel blank. It also works, right? It works both ways. What we're doing is we're trying to communicate. We need to convey that message beyond the emotions. Whenever emotions are high, it's really, really difficult to communicate, right? If you use I statements and you give yourself time, it's going to be easier for you to understand those things, right? So my suggestion is, number one is, again, we won't do it here, but practice, again, it doesn't have to be with a significant other, it can be with your children, it can be with your parents, it can be with anyone. Practice the I statement, focus on you, right? So, and the other one, there's one. Okay, so this is a relationship growth activity. So this is not about, well, there's something wrong. There's always something that we can do to improve, right? Something that that can help us become less imperfect, right? So choose one question to ask your partner. It can be any question. Now, something that I encourage you to do is reflect on this. When you go home, when you're with your partner, with your spouse, when you're with your children, when you're with people like that, what is your communication style? How do you communicate with them? And also, what kind of questions do you ask them? If I ask you something about your significant other, would you be able to tell me? And I'm not talking about what is her favorite color? What does she like to eat? Because you should probably, both of you go eat in the same place, right? So like, well, I like Alameda, well, yeah. Or I like Whataburger. Yeah, you go there. But something different, like what is her favorite Bible verse? What is her favorite book? It's unfair because I know everyone will say the Bible, right? But other than that, right? What is her favorite TV show, right? Things, and you'll be surprised the things that we don't know, that we probably should know, right? It's not something bad if you don't know it, but it makes you realize, well, I should know more about my wife or my husband, right? So some of the examples here, I'll post a whole list of them online, but what was your partner's favorite TV show when he or she was a kid? Now, how is that going to improve my relationship? You'll be surprised. And she's tired of all my stories. My daughters, I tell a story every night, and you know what? When we were just talking about a party when I was a kid, and I would remember we ate a lot of mangoes. That's what I remember. It may be insignificant, but when I was sharing that with her, it took me back. And I was like, oh, it's like I'm sharing something important to her. It makes us more connected. I feel more connected, right? So it's not only, well, what is the point of that question? You choose the question, but connect, right? That's the whole point. What is the happiest life your partner can imagine? What is a goal your partner would like to achieve that he or she has not shared with you? Things like that, okay? So these are just some examples. You can come up with different questions. And we're going to post more. So relationship conflict resolution. Whenever, this is to avoid conflict. But guess what? We're human. There's going to be times that we're going to be in a position of conflict. Sometimes we may disagree. Sometimes we may get upset. That's okay. If that happens, what are we going to do? Number one, it shouldn't escalate that much. And number two, if that happens, we do this, right? Other than everything we've talked about, focus on the problem, not the person. Okay, it's not, well, you didn't listen to me. Well, what is the problem? You feel unheard, that's different. You use the I statements, right? Use reflective listening. You listen to them, and then you talk about what you heard. Use I statements, know when to take a timeout. If emotions are too high, you need to take a break. And work toward a resolution, okay? So what are we gonna do about this, okay? You know what? I realized that I made a mistake. From now on, I'm gonna give you space. I'm not gonna be talking like this, or I need to resolve, I'm gonna be getting home earlier to help you with household chores. I'm gonna wash the dishes, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna talk to you more, I'm gonna spend more time with you. We're gonna spend an hour, just the two of us. We're gonna do a board game, we're gonna go for dinner, anything that works for you, right? I think that's it. Yes, that's 52. Yeah. So that's ultimately the take-home message, and what we want to do with this series is to provide information that will help you reflect, that would help you analyze where you stand, and give you some strategies so that from there, if there's anything that you need to adjust, that you can adjust it and you know how, right? If anything happens, and remember, ultimately, the point is that we want to make services available. If there's something that is more serious, that needs more intervention or something like that, we're working together on developing a program so that we can offer those services here and we can offer the help, right? One of the concerns that I always get when somebody walks into my office is, who are you going to give this information to? No one, unless you give me permission to do it. There's some limitations of confidentiality, then yourself, then you're to others, things like that. But one of the reasons why people don't want to open up is like, I don't want anyone else to know about this, Well, our profession tells us no. We're very discreet. We keep everything. And what I was sharing with Pastor Nate, there's nothing that you can tell me or anyone can tell me that I haven't heard of, and nothing that would scare me. I've heard it all. The point of this is, how can we help? And I think that this is the first of series of talks that we're going to have. But from here, we're going to do a lot of other activities. So if there's anything, any suggestions, anything you think, maybe we should do this differently. Maybe you can talk about other topics that maybe we haven't thought of that you think would be useful. Let us know. We're here to serve. And to serve a church means we take care of our church. And the church is the people, right? So we're here for that, right? So I guess without forcing anyone to talk, any questions, any concerns, any thoughts, anything you would like to share before we close the presentation? No, going once, going twice, yeah. But one at a time. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. You've been wonderful, and we'll be working. So,
Thank you. Wasn't that awesome? It's such a great, and like he was saying, that's the point of the series. I know the situation that we're in has changed things drastically, but we're going to be putting this content on there for the people and for y'all. Let's say next week we can't meet like this. This is a perfect time. We're in quarantine. We have to be at home. Let's make use of that time. Let's, instead of wasting 9 hours or 8 hours on Netflix, let's do some of these exercises. Let's try to improve our family. Let's make it stronger. Maybe it's already good. That's great, but let's make it stronger, okay? And like he was saying, if you feel like you need a little bit more help, or you just want to talk personally, we want to make that available to you too. So just please reach out to us, to me if you have my number, or through Facebook. I'll give you my number through Messenger if you message me. Or right now, if you need my number, we want to stay in contact. That's the key. We don't want to be distant from each other, even though we're practicing social distancing in some ways. We want to still stay connected. Okay, so can we pray? Let's pray so we can be dismissed. Father, we want to thank you so much for this day. Thank you for allowing us to gather here together today. It's becoming so special to be able to gather, Father. We sometimes take it for granted, and in times where we can't, it's very special to see each other, to be able to hug each other, to see each other's faces, and we just thank you for this opportunity, God. I pray, Father, for the situation that we're in. I pray for the city and the city officials and all those who are helping to keep order, those in the stores and all those things, Father. I pray that your peace would just begin to cover the city and cover our families, Lord. I pray a specific prayer over our families in the church, God, over those who are trusting in you, over those who are calling on your name. I ask that you would hear our prayers, God, and heal our land. I pray a special protection over the families of Ebenezer Family Church and over the families that are here today, that your angels would surround them, that your spirit would protect their homes, God. I pray that as we're at home or wherever we're at, we would continue to be the light of the world and be the salt that this world needs, Father God. I pray that we would not go into hiding, and I pray that your gospel good news would continue to spread. And I pray, God, that our families would get stronger and stronger. We pray this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Thank you so much. We'll keep you posted about how things are going to go. So we love you guys. Have a great night.